my personal opinion I'd just like to throw in is that those none of those people were telling lies, those from Flatwoods especially.
I knew myself that they saw something.
It was a shadow-like thing to me, move, and there was something it was there.
Tonight's episode is about a young family who followed strange lights into the woods and came face to face with something terrifying. Everyone who encountered it suffered some form of mysterious illness, with some spending weeks in hospital recovering from the encounter. The events of that night have never been explained. Welcome to Paranormal FM, your home of the strange, unexplained, and all things that go bump in the night. If that sounds like the kind of thing you enjoy, then give this episode a like and subscribe for more content. This is a terrifying story of the Flatwoods Monster. It all started on a warm summer's evening in September 1952. Audra Harper and her friend were walking through a field to a nearby store. The road leading out of their property was near enough impassable, and with daylight fading, they agreed it would be safest and quickest to take a shortcut through the wooded area near Flatwoods. As dusk settled, the twilight shadows snaked along the ground towards the two young women, and in the gloom, Audra saw something glowing on the hill. "I wonder who that is up there," she said, half to her friend and half to herself. They agreed it was most likely a farmer, chasing foxes or burning something in his field. The two girls continued walking, but as Audra was talking about her plans for the evening, she noticed her friend was staring at the hill. Then a look of confusion spread slowly across her face. Audra followed her friend's gaze and saw that the glow on the hill was now a ball of fire floating in midair. The two women stared at the fireball, transfixed, when all of a sudden it vanished, and in its place stood an impossibly tall, dark silhouette of some sort of humanoid figure. They couldn't see its face, but they could feel it, staring malevolently down at them from the hilltop. They started to run, and in the dark, they ran straight into a barbed wire fence. Without a second thought, they threw themselves over it and ran. They eventually reached a tall gate that was fastened shut. Audra reached desperately through the bars to open it, when she suddenly heard the panicked cries of her friend screaming that it was right behind them. Finally the gate opened, and as Audra turned to fasten the gate behind them, she saw, just feet away, the huge black figure advancing towards them. They slammed the gate shut and didn't stop running until they reached the safety of the store. The store owner didn't believe them when they told them what happened. But this all changed a short time later, when a young family reported their own terrifying encounter with what became known as the Flatwoods Monster. It had just passed 7:15 p.m. on September the 12th, 1952. A group of young boys were playing football on the lawn of Flatwoods Elementary School. Among the boys were Edward May, 13, and Freddie May, who was 12. The fading daylight told Edward it was time to go home. But when he looked over to tell Freddie it was time to leave, he saw him staring at something in the sky. Before he could say anything, Freddy pointed a finger at the sky and said, "Hey, what's that?" The boys looked up and saw a bright, fiery object about the size of a house moving across the darkening skies overhead. They initially thought it was some kind of meteor, but as the object slowed and headed towards a nearby hill, they noticed that it wasn't a ball of fire, but shaped more like the ace of spades and was pulsating red and orange as it moved. The children's excitement gave way to confusion as the object circled, then briefly hovered over the hilltop, before descending slowly to the ground. It came to a rest just behind the peak of the hill, on the land of Farmer Fisher. And although the children could no longer see the object, they could see its lights pulsating over the top of the hill. Their game now forgotten, the May brothers ran home with some friends to tell their mother, Kathleen May, a 32-year-old beautician, what they had seen. They rushed into the house and excitedly told her about what happened. And although she was skeptical, she nonetheless agreed to go with them to investigate. Kathleen was understandably nervous about venturing into the woods at night, so she called 17-year-old Eugene Lemon, who was a family friend, and asked him to go with them. She felt that his experience as a member of the National Guard would offer some additional safety. By the time they left to investigate, there were 7 people in total, as well as Richie, the family dog. The group walked the 1/4 mile to the hill behind which the children had watched the object descend, and when they reached its crest, they saw something incredible. About 50 feet away was a pulsating red light illuminating the tree line. By now, the sun had set, and the pulsating light was like a beacon, beckoning the group nearer. As they got closer, they realized that the light was coming from within a strange, egg-shaped craft. It was emitting a strange greenish fog that clung to the ground beneath it. The fog had a strong, acrid metallic smell that made their eyes and noses burn. A stunned silence fell among the group. Then a strange hissing, like that of bacon being fried, filled the air. The dog responded to the hissing by running towards the craft, barking and snarling, but it was soon engulfed by the strange fog. The dog's barks became howls, and seconds later, the dog shot out the fog and ran all the way home. But before anyone could follow him, the strange hissing came again. It was then they realized that the hissing was coming from somewhere above the craft. They looked up at the trees and saw something moving in the tree line. Eugene shone his flashlight at where they had seen the movement and revealed something terrifying. Floating among the branches was a massive humanoid creature, around 10 to 12 foot tall, spewing the same green acrid fog as the nearby craft. It was dressed in what looked like a dark green metal robe with folds at the bottom, which rose at the back to form a hood with a distinct point at the top. The hood framed a round red face, which contained 2 red glowing eyes. The figure's head was turned to the sky. It was emitting 2 beams of red light from its eyes, as it slowly moved its head from side to side. It looked like it was scanning for something. Eugene released a scream of unadulterated fear, dropped his flashlight and ran. The others stood in place, frozen by fear. The screams must have alerted the creature to their presence, because it slowly turned its head and directed the beams towards the group. It released another menacing hiss and glided towards the group, still spewing the same noxious gas from before. As it glided, it reached for them with a pair of claw-like talons at the end of two spindly arms. The group ran home in terror, and when they got there, they called the authorities as well as a local newspaper to report their encounter. Ironically, the local sheriff had already been called out, following reports of a crashed aircraft in the area, but after finding no sign of a crash, he headed to the May family home, and after hearing their statements, went to the site of the reported encounter, but found no signs of the craft or reported creature. He did, however, report finding two large skid marks, trampled grass, and most significantly, the same noxious smell reported by the family. The following morning, the field editor of local newspaper, the Braxton Democrat, visited the site and found two tracks in the mud and traces of a thick black liquid. He reported this as possible evidence for a UFO landing site, but it was later revealed that the tracks were those of a Chevrolet pickup truck that had visited the site prior to the journalist's arrival, and the dark liquid was oil, possibly from the same vehicle. The May's encounter was quickly dismissed as hysteria by the police, but theirs wasn't the only report of something strange occurring that night. Investigators from the Civilian Saucer investigation obtained several eyewitness accounts from people reporting to have seen strange phenomena around the same time as the May's encounter with the Flatwoods Monster. In addition to Audra Harper's accounts, the mother of a local farmer came forward and reported that at the approximate time of the crash, her house had been violently shaken, and her radio had cut out for 45 minutes. And the director of a local board of education claimed to have seen an unidentified craft taken off at 6:30 a.m, the morning after the creature was reported.
My personal opinion, I'd just like to throw in, is that those none of those people were telling lies, those from Flatwoods especially, that the 400 odd other people whom we interviewed, including the young man who reported to the police number 3 incident, the crash, and those young farmers, were certainly not lying.
The following day, a young couple had a particularly close encounter with the Flatwoods Monster that would seal its place as one of West Virginia's most unsettling and terrifying mysteries. It was the evening after the May family's encounter, and George and Edith Snitowski were driving along Route 4, around 20 miles south of Flatwoods, with their 18-month-old son, when, without warning, their car suddenly lost power, and as the headlights slowly dimmed, darkness enveloped the young family. As George desperately tried to restart the car, a putrid smell of sulphur filled the air. The road they had broken down on was a rural country road. They hadn't passed another car the entire time, and if the problem wasn't fixed, George had no idea how long they'd be stuck out there. He stepped out of the car to investigate, but shortly after popping the car's bonnet, he was interrupted by the sound of his son crying in the back seat. He looked up and saw a bright light filling the night sky. He instinctively closed the bonnet, sensing something was wrong, and that was when he saw it. Floating on the road ahead of him, just a few feet away, was a giant humanoid figure. He jumped back in the car and locked the doors just as it started gliding towards him. George grabbed his wife and child, and the three huddled together in terror as the creature slowly approached the vehicle. It looked like the same thing the May family had reported the previous night, but with one horrifying difference. Its head was reptilian and bony. The creature ran a lizard-like claw along the side of the car, then rested its hands on the bonnet and peered in at the terrified family, before gliding away into the woods. As soon as the creature disappeared from sight, the light in the sky faded away, and the car came back to life, allowing the young family to drive away. While all this was happening, the Maze story was only beginning. A short time later, everyone who encountered the Flatwoods Monster started to fall mysteriously ill, with symptoms that ranged from nausea, irritation and swelling in their throats and sinuses, and even convulsions. Eugene Lemon was more affected than the others, having experienced violent convulsions, vomiting and irritation for weeks after the event, and at one point he needed hospitalization. Doctors, like the police, dismissed the symptoms as side effects of hysteria, but many of those who interviewed the family weren't so sure. News of the Flatwoods Monster quickly spread, and it wasn't long until national news outlets picked up on the story. Kathleen May and Eugene Lemon even appeared on the CBS television show We the People, bringing their story to a nationwide audience. The publicity soon attracted the attention of the US government, and a short time later, the US Air Force started their own investigation into the incident as part of Project Blue Book, which was the code name for the US government's study of reported UFO phenomenon.
However, there have been a certain percentage of this volume of reports that have been made by credible observers of relatively incredible things. It is this group of observations that we now are attempting to resolve.
The Air Force's conclusion was much like that of the police. The lights in the sky were a meteor, which had also been spotted 300 miles away in Baltimore at the very same time. The clawed monster with glowing eyes was nothing more than an owl, which was misidentified due to the hysteria the group was experiencing at the time of the sighting. But if they hoped this would lay the matter to rest, they were mistaken. Kathleen May claimed that during the course of the investigation, two men in black suits came to her house to ask her about what she had seen. At some point during the interview, she mentioned finding a strange oil-like substance on her dress, which she assumed came from either the craft or the creature. Apparently, the men took a particular interest in this, and asked if they could take the dress with them for analysis. She agreed, on the condition they brought it back. But once the men took the dress, she never saw it again. And while this may sound outlandish, there is evidence that the US government were covering up something. Many years later, Colonel Dale Levitt, who led the US Air Force investigation into the Flatwoods incident, came forward. He said that contrary to the official reports, he and his men found several pieces of metal debris and oily residue at the reported crash site, but they never heard anything more after sending them away to Washington for analysis. On the same night as the reported airplane crash and sighting of the Flatwoods Monster, an F-94 Starfire interceptor plane was sent out on patrol, but at some point in its patrol route, the plane disappeared from radar and was never found. The US Air Force has remained tight-lipped about the incident, refusing to answer any questions about what could have happened to the aircraft, and even went as far as to remove their missing crew members, John Jones Jr. and John Del Curto, from their service records. The timing of the two events has led observers to speculate if whether what was over the skies in Flatwoods was somehow connected to the disappearance of the Starfire interceptor. When I first started researching this episode, I thought it would be a really interesting story about a cryptid, but it's turned out to be much more than that, and opened up a few unexpected rabbit holes along the way. So let's take a look at the theories surrounding what really happened. Although what the May family encountered has since become known as the Flatwoods Monster, those present didn't seem to think it was a creature at all. They described its movements as more mechanical than organic. The eyes were more like torches designed to beam out light, and the lower half of its body was described as looking like a missile. Nonetheless, it exhibited intelligence, or at least awareness, as it reacted to the screams of Eugene Lemon. This has led some to theorise that the Flatwoods Monster was some sort of sentinel or guardian designed to guard the craft. The reported encounter took place in the context of the Cold War, and it's since emerged that the US government weren't above covertly testing potential weapons on their own people. Could this be a case of people being in the wrong place at the wrong time? The illnesses reported following the encounter were written off as symptoms of hysteria. In other words, it was psychosomatic. But what are the odds of all 7 people suffering varying degrees of the same hysterical reaction? The varied symptoms could also be explained by different levels of exposure to a substance known to be harmful to humans. It's interesting that one doctor, while treating the group, remarked how similar their symptoms were to those exposed to mustard gas. Although personally, I think chlorine gas is a better candidate. Chlorine gas has a greenish colour, a pungent odour, and a density higher than air, so it accumulates on the ground. The mild symptoms of exposure to chlorine gas are eye, nose and throat irritation, vomiting, and in some cases, convulsions. It's almost identical to the fog emitted by the Flatwoods Monster in both appearance, behaviour, and the symptoms experienced by those exposed to it.
What do you think about the skeptics who believe that the monster was an owl?
Oh, I don't see it.
They should have been there and seen it themselves.
Yeah, yeah, they would have known then it wasn't an owl. Mm-hmm. I didn't even hear an owl.
The most popular theory is a combination of natural phenomena and mass hysteria. Joe Nickell of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry launched an investigation into the case in 2000 and concluded that the bright lights in the sky were most likely a meteor. The pulsating red light was an aircraft navigation or hazard beacon, and the creature the witnesses saw was a large owl. The reportedly glowing red eyes are a common trait in nocturnal animals when light shines on them, and the talons the creature was described as having are very similar to those of an owl. This was also the time of the Roswell incident, the Cold War, and the space race, which at the time brought an unprecedented level of interest in extraterrestrials. In fact, less than 2 months earlier, there was a 3-week period of UFOs being reported over Washington, in what would become known as the Washington DC UFO Incident, or UFO Flap.
In Washington, ghost-like objects dart across the radar screen at the CAA Traffic Control Center at National Airport for several hours, traveling more than 100 miles an hour. Air Force jet fighters spend several hours chasing the objects plotted on the radar scope.
The combination of these factors created a climate ripe for hysteria when faced with something frightening that couldn't be immediately explained. But if this was nothing more than a case of mass hysteria and misidentification, what's the explanation for the putrid smelling fog? The sheriff and subsequent investigators all smelled the same residual odour at the scene. This means there must have been something that left a smell so strong that it could still be detected hours after the event. And whatever it was, it couldn't have been a meteor or an owl. It's just one of a number of unexplained and strange aspects to this case, and the reason the legacy of the Flatwoods Monster continues to endure and fascinate to this day. That's all from Paranormal FM. Thank you for sharing your evening with me. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to like, share and subscribe, and be sure to join me next time.